In 1912, the town of Claymore nestled along the Silver Line River, still a small, peaceful dot on the vast map of America. It was a place where farmers wore wide-brimmed hats, carpenters had dust-covered hands, and elderly shopkeepers greeted one another each morning with a friendly nod. In Claymore, everything seemed slow, orderly, and peaceful to the point where even the dogs were too lazy to bark at night. Yet, amidst the rustic land, there was a treasure that the whole town was proud of, the Claymore Gold Vault. It wasn't a legendary treasure or a deep mine in the earth, but a real gold reserve that the town had built over many years through taxes, trade, and careful investments. They viewed this vault as their collective heartbeat, a guarantee for the future of the coming generations. The gold was stored in a deep vault beneath the town hall, a massive gray stone building with soaring vaulted ceilings constructed by craftsmen from the distant east. The vault door was made of thick steel, so heavy that it took 3 strong men to turn the lock. But there was only one key, a special, finely crafted alloy key, kept under strict guard. The key was not kept in a safe or hidden under a pillow like in the old stories. It was worn on a silver chain, always kept close to Mr. Bernard Murphy, the town treasurer, a middle-aged man with a round belly and a neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard. People trusted him as much as they trusted the unchanging presence of the town clock tower. However, on a foggy December morning, when Mr. Murphy arrived to open the vault for the regular inventory, the key was gone. The silver chain still hung around his neck, but the key had mysteriously disappeared. There were no signs of violent theft, no broken windows, and no sounds in the night. The whole town of Claymore was in shock. The elderly gathered around windowsills, muttering, while the children exchanged fearful glances. The rumors spread faster than the wind. Who had stolen the key to the Claymore Gold Vault? And if someone could steal the key, would they soon manage to open the steel door and carry away the town's dream? In those days of confusion, as suspicion spread like toxic smoke in the air, one small name began to be whispered behind closed doors: Elina Monroe. Elina Monroe, the orphan girl just turned 13, was a familiar shadow in Claymore. With her messy black hair, the gray dress always frayed at the edges, and her wide blue eyes that constantly gleamed with wariness, Elina made a living by doing various odd jobs around town. During the day, she carried water for the inn. In the afternoons, she swept the churchyard, and at night, she sometimes helped the cook at the tavern wash dishes. People were used to seeing her quietly, carrying bundles of firewood or old loaves of bread, slipping through the dusty streets without drawing attention. But now, just overnight, the way people looked at Elina had changed. As news of the missing key to the gold vault spread across Claymore, the silent panic slowly turned into whispered rumors, and then into outright accusations. And within those murmurs, one detail kept repeating. Someone claimed to have seen Elina lingering near the town hall that night. The girl was hanging around the side of the building, the bakery owner told the group of women mending clothes in the yard. She pretended to pick up firewood, but I swear she was looking around as if she was plotting something. "That's right!" Mr. McGuire, the night watchman, chimed in. I saw her at the end of the street, under the gaslight. She was pacing back and forth, not like she was just passing by. Within hours, from a poor, forgotten girl, Elina became the prime suspect. People looked at her with a mix of suspicion and anger, as if just one more confirmation was all it would take for the whole town to storm in and drag her out from the dark corner. Elina didn't understand what was happening. When she was summoned by Sheriff Dawson, a tall man with a booming voice, she could only meekly explain that she was looking for firewood that night to trade for a hot meal from the inn's kitchen. But that explanation sounded so fragile, so easily distorted amidst the growing fury and hunger spreading like wildfire through the town. "That girl," an old woman whispered the next morning at the market. "She has no roots, no family. Who knows what's going on in her head?" In some twisted way, Elina's poverty and isolation had become the heaviest evidence against her. When the town hall called an emergency session and decided to put the matter on trial before the entire town, Elina sat silently in the cold room, her hands clutching the frayed edges of her dress, eyes lifted to look at the people who had once bought bread from her, who had once asked her to carry water, now sitting in rows, their gazes cold and scrutinizing. No one knew yet, but this trial would not only change Elina's fate, it would also uncover the darkest corners of the town of Claymore. On the day of Elina Monroe's trial, Claymore's town hall was more crowded than it had ever been before. The stone room, once empty and cold, was now packed with faces stiff from curiosity, anger, and somewhere beneath it all, an eerie sense of fear. Wooden chairs were squeezed together in rows, while those who arrived late had to stand against the walls. The air was suffocating, thick with the smell of sweat and damp coats, but no one wanted to miss the spectacle that had been the talk of the town for the past week. In the center of the room, the old wooden podium set up for the defendant seemed to swallow Elina's small frame whole. Sheriff Dawson stepped forward, his voice booming, and solemnly introduced, "The defendant, Elina Monroe. The charge, stealing the key to the Claymore gold vault." Judge Hargrove, a bald man with glasses sliding down his nose, struck the wooden gavel on the table, signaling for silence. He glanced around the room and asked, "Elina Monroe, who is your legal representative?" A moment of utter silence enveloped the room. Elina clenched her hands tightly, her nails digging into her flesh. She had knocked on every lawyer's door in this small town. No one had agreed to represent her. Some shook their heads indifferently, while others outright turned her away, as if simply being associated with her was a crime in itself. The girl swallowed hard, lifted her head, her voice trembling but clear. "Your Honor, I will represent myself." A wave of whispered murmurs swept through the room like a gust of wind. All eyes turned toward her, eyes filled with disdain, pity, and a touch of cruel amusement. An orphan, uneducated, with no family to protect her, daring to stand up and defend herself in this solemn courtroom. To them, it was a farce waiting to unfold. Judge Hargrove raised an eyebrow, staring at her as if to make sure he hadn't misheard, then nodded slowly. "Very well. The trial will continue." Elina gripped the fabric of her worn dress, standing tall before the court. She knew what she was about to do was madness, but she also knew that if she didn't speak up, no one else would do it for her. The faint light from the high windows poured down, casting a dim halo over her tangled hair and thin shoulders, like a flickering lantern in the storm. In that moment, facing the cold gaze of hundreds, with accusations made without evidence, the 13-year-old girl silently swore to herself she would not back down, not while the truth could still be revealed. Elina took a step forward, standing even closer to the wooden podium. Her small hands gripped the edge of the podium until her knuckles turned white. She took a deep breath, allowing her frail chest to gather some strength to speak. Elina's voice was hoarse, trembling in the dead silence of the room. "Your Honor, I do not deny that I was near the town hall that night." Immediately, murmurs rose from the crowd. Some nodded as if they'd found the damning evidence, while others exchanged glances, shaking their heads. On the jury benches, a few faces were scrunched in displeasure, scribbling notes furiously. Elina lifted her head, her large brown eyes filled with tears but gleaming with an unusual light. "But I swear before this court, I had no intention of stealing. I was there for another reason, a reason I would like to present." Judge Hargrove leaned back in his chair, nodded slowly, and stroked his silver beard. "Go ahead, Elina." Swallowing hard to push away her fear, Elina spoke slowly, each word carefully considered. "That night, I had just finished cleaning at Mr. Tinsley's house. On my way back to the inn, I passed through it. It was very late, the street lights were dim, and the cold wind was blowing." She paused, gripping her hands tighter for courage. Suddenly, I heard a strange noise coming from behind the town hall. It wasn't the wind, it was the sound of metal clashing, in a fluid, like a lock being picked open. A murmur rippled through the room. Several eyes quickly exchanged glances. "I was curious and scared too," Elina continued, her legs shaking but her voice growing clearer. "So I hid behind the statue in the center. From there, I saw two men fiddling with the gold vault door." A wave of shock ran through the room. Sheriff Dawson furrowed his brow. The lawyers in the room began whispering to one another. Elina looked up at the judge, her eyes pleading. "I didn't dare show myself because I knew that in Claymore, a child like me, an orphan, wouldn't be believed no matter what I said. I just stood there watching, and then I ran to find Uncle Merrick, the night watchman at the church, to report it." Judge Hargrove nodded thoughtfully. "Do you have anyone to confirm this?" Elina bit her lip, speaking softly. I couldn't find Uncle Merrick. When I got to the church, the door was closed and the lights were off. I had to go back to the inn. The next morning, I was arrested. A heavy silence fell over the room. The crowd, once certain of their victory, now wavered. There was something in Elina's story, her sincerity, simplicity, and the desperation that couldn't be faked, that made many begin to wonder. Had we been too quick to accuse this girl? Elina took a deep breath, trying to steady her voice. The entire courtroom was as silent as a tomb. All eyes were on the thin young girl standing alone in the vast room. I can describe the two men, Elina began, her eyes fixed on the jury. They were both wearing long, dark gray coats with wide-brimmed hats pulled low to cover their faces. But I remember one detail very clearly. She raised her hand, trembling but determined. The first one, the taller one, had a limp. It seemed like his left leg was weak. Each step he took was slightly off to the side. Whispers rose in the room. In the back row, a man even turned to look at the person next to him, his face filled with surprise. No one in the previous investigation had mentioned a limp. Elina continued, her face flushed but her eyes shining. And the second one. I remember him more clearly. When he reached out to open the vault door, he wore a large silver ring on his left hand, shaped like an eagle's head. The light from the street lamp shone on it, and I saw it very clearly. Judge Hargrove raised an eyebrow. That was the detail the police had never mentioned. Eagle head, silver ring, he repeated thoughtfully. Elina nodded. And there's one more thing, she said, her voice trembling with agitation. The next morning, when the police investigated, they found footprints in front of the vault door, but none of them were small, like mine. A murmur rippled through the room like a wave. Elina seized the opportunity while the crowd was still unsettled. If I had taken the key, I would have had to be very close to the vault door. My footprints are much smaller than an adult's, but the photos in the investigation report only show large footprints, very large ones. The jury began whispering among themselves, their expressions more pensive than before. A few people in the crowd who had glared at Elina earlier were now whispering, confused. Elina clutched the edge of the podium, closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. Speaking firmly, I can't prove my innocence with paperwork or witnesses, but please consider this. If I were the culprit, why would I have been hiding, watching? Why didn't I run away that night, instead of going back to work as usual? And why don't the traces at the scene match me? She looked directly at the judge, her gaze unwavering, though fear still gripped her heart. I ask for only one thing, Elina said, her voice ringing out in the silence. Please find the man with the eagle head silver ring, the one who walks with a limp. They are the ones who need to be questioned, not me. A heavy silence descended over the room, as if everyone had just been shaken awake by a truth they didn't want to face. Judge Hargrove tapped the gavel lightly, the sound echoing through the stifling air of the courtroom. We will recess for 3 days, he announced, his voice low and steady. The jury will need time to further review the evidence, and the police, under the court's direction, will reopen the investigation. A murmur of astonishment spread through the crowd. It was unprecedented for an orphaned girl to cause such an upheaval at the Claymore City Hall. The townspeople left the courtroom in a state of confusion and unease, while Elina stood still, her hands tightly clasped together, her heart pounding in her chest. That afternoon, Police Chief Lyman led a small team to begin re-examining the entire area around the town hall. He appeared annoyed, having to listen to a child had wounded his honor. But an order was an order. They started by going through the footprint reports again. Lyman flipped through the photos of the shoe prints. Just as Elina had said, all of them were large, no small prints at all. Even a young officer in the team mumbled, his face turning red. How did I not notice this before? The rumor of the man with the silver ring quickly spread throughout the town. The police asked around at every bar and restaurant, trying to find anyone who had seen a strange man with a limp wearing a large eagle-shaped ring. 3 tense days passed. Then, on a dreary morning, a street vendor named Marvin Thomas arrived at the police station, his face stricken with panic. I remember now, Marvin whispered, his voice trembling. 2 nights before the theft, 2 strangers bought food from my stall. One of them walked with a limp and the other wore a huge silver ring. Lyman sat up straight. Are you sure? he asked, his eyes gleaming. Absolutely. I even asked about the ring. He just laughed and said it was a lucky charm for places with a lot of gold and silver. That information hit like a lightning bolt. Lyman immediately ordered a search to follow the trail. Based on Marvin's description, they traced the two strangers to a cheap motel on the outskirts of Claymore, where they had checked in under false names. When the police raided the room, it was empty. But on the old wooden table, under the dim light, they found something. A worn cloth hand cover, embroidered with a silver thread eagle emblem. There was no doubt left. The two men were real. And now the question was, where had they gone? The chase for the two suspicious men seemed to grow more intense by the minute. The clues provided by Marvin Thomas had opened up a new path. Lyman and his team quickly spread out in different directions, following every lead that might point to the whereabouts of the two strangers. However, things didn't go as smoothly as they had hoped. First, they checked the residential areas far from the town center, places where people with criminal records might hide. But no one remembered seeing the two strange men. The motels they had rented were now empty. Despite the police sweeping through every possible location, there was no sign indicating that the men had left town. The investigation began to hit a dead end. Meanwhile, Elina remained at her boarding house, anxiously restless. She sensed that this was more than just a simple burglary. The image of the limping man and the silver ring still haunted her. But what confused her most was the strange silence from the police. It seemed as if they had turned their backs on her, even though she was the only one providing useful information. Suddenly, on one dark night when everything seemed to have settled into sleep, a mysterious woman appeared at the police station. With long black hair and dark skin, she wore a silver-gray cloak, her sharp eyes like razor blades. This woman was an unexpected surprise to everyone. She introduced herself as Maura Davidson, a private detective from the big city. Maura claimed that she had been tracking the key theft from afar and had important information about the suspects the police were chasing. The ones you're looking for, Maura said, her voice calm yet commanding, are not ordinary thieves. They are part of a much larger network, a network you cannot comprehend. Lyman and the other officers were stunned. They had no knowledge of Maura, and her sudden appearance seemed to bring a glimmer of light in the darkness. But Maura wasn't quick to share everything. Instead, she requested a private meeting with Elina. The next morning, Elina and Maura met at a small cafe in the town center. Maura sat across from her, showing no sense of urgency, only calmly staring at Elina. "Do you believe you're part of something bigger?" Maura asked, her cold eyes locking on to the young girl. Elina felt confused. She couldn't know how complicated things really were, but Maura's words made her feel as though she was standing at a crossroads where everything could change in an instant. So the pursuit had entered a new phase. It was no longer just about finding the thief of the key, but now it all seemed to be leading to a much deeper secret. And Maura, with the information she carried, might be the key to unlocking that door. But the question remained, who was Maura and why had she appeared at this exact moment? Was she truly here to help, or was she merely exploiting the situation for her own gain? Maura sat down next to Elina, her voice lowering, filled with seriousness. "What we're facing isn't just a key theft," Maura began, her eyes suddenly darkening as she spoke of the suspects. "The people we're looking for aren't common thieves. They're part of a larger criminal organization that has been operating in this area for a long time." Elina felt herself being pulled into a massive whirlwind. What had seemed like a simple theft of a key to a gold vault was now changing in ways she couldn't have imagined. "A criminal organization?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "Then why did they choose Claymore?" Maura looked at Elina, her eyes filled with concern. "This town holds a treasure not everyone knows about. That gold vault doesn't just contain the town's valuable assets, it guards an ancient secret. The key we're talking about isn't just for opening a vault, it's the key to unlocking an invaluable legacy, a secret that many, even the town's most powerful families, have been protecting for centuries." Elina felt a coldness creep into her heart. She never could have imagined that a small town like Claymore held such a vast secret. But at that very moment, a question flickered in her mind. So how important is this key? Why go through all this trouble to steal it? That's because the gold vault doesn't just contain gold, Mara said, her voice tightening. Part of that treasure includes books, maps, and ancient documents that could lead to other treasures no one has ever discovered. And that key, if it falls into the right hands, could unlock an ancient treasure that has been hidden since the medieval times. Once opened, not only Claymore but the entire region will change. Elina remained silent, but her mind was filled with a series of unanswerable thoughts and questions. Why did her parents die in such an unclear accident? Could their deaths be connected to the people chasing her now? Or had they discovered some secret which made them a target? The feeling of unease grew within Elina, but she couldn't turn back. She had already gone too deep into this game. A part of her, despite the fear, felt that she needed to resolve it all. If the truth about her parents' harsh death was tied to this criminal organization, she would have to face them, no matter the cost. So what do we do next? Elina asked, her voice steadier now, though her heart still carried much worry. Mara took a deep breath. We'll have to cooperate, Elina. Together, we need to uncover the truth about the key and what's being hidden. But first, we need to trace the criminals, the ones who are doing everything they can to seize this treasure. Elina looked at Mara, determination shining in her eyes. She couldn't back down. The questions she had carried for so many years were now beginning to be revealed, and she wouldn't stop until she found the truth. Elina and Mara stood before the gates of the cemetery, their hearts heavy with tension. The night had settled over the town of Claymore, and only the faint light of the moon illuminated the ancient tombstones. The tomb they were heading to, according to the information Mara had just revealed, was where the golden key was hidden. It was the place where the town's noble families, for generations, had concealed their precious treasures and historical secrets that no one was allowed to know. We have to find the key before they get here, Mara whispered, her voice laced with worry. There's still some time, but not much. Elina nodded, feeling a heavy weight rise in her chest. She had never imagined that an ancient tomb in the cemetery could be the place where everything would be decided. But now the truth was gradually coming to light, and she couldn't back down. They began to move into the cemetery, carefully avoiding leaving any traces to avoid detection. As they ventured deeper into the cemetery, Elina and Mara suddenly heard footsteps from behind. They turned around and saw two figures, the very ones the entire town had suspected of being the culprits in the missing key case. They were approaching, cautious but with a scheming air. "Run!" Mara shouted, but as she turned to flee, one of the figures suddenly lunged at her, knocking her to the ground. A wound on her leg started to bleed. Elina didn't have time to worry about Mara. She had to face this situation on her own. Her mind was racing, but her intelligence had helped her overcome difficult challenges throughout the journey. She recalled the details she had learned from observing these criminals. They were always arrogant, never thinking they would be caught off guard. "We know everything," Elina shouted, her voice firm. "You can't hide the truth forever." One of them smirked. "You think you can beat us? You're nothing, an orphan with nothing to your name." Elina ignored his words. She knew this was the moment of decision. "I don't have to do this alone," she said, her eyes glowing with a fierce determination, "and you can't kill the truth." She turned and saw the silver ring one of the attackers was wearing. That was the sign Mora had mentioned. This person was connected to a noble family in town. Sensing his weakness, Elina swiftly lunged and used her agility to disarm him. The two criminals couldn't believe their eyes as they saw Elina standing firm, decisive. But Elina didn't stop there. In the midst of the confrontation, she quickly remembered the stories Mara had told her about the criminal organization and the involvement of the noble family. One of the attackers was a descendant of one of the town's oldest noble families, someone everyone thought was innocent. "So that's it," Elina said, staring intently at the one wearing the silver ring. "Someone from that family orchestrated the theft of the key, framing me to cover their tracks and hide crucial evidence." The two criminals froze, unable to believe what they had just heard. But Elina didn't give them time to react. She quickly pulled Mara to her feet, determined not to let them slip away. "We're not going to let them ruin everything," Elina said, gripping Mara's hand. "We have to keep moving forward. The treasure and the truth won't be hidden anymore." As Elina and Mara began to approach the tomb, they knew their journey would not be easy, but they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, for they had realized that the truth and justice would always prevail, no matter the cost. The final trial took place in a tense atmosphere, with the whole town gathered at the courthouse to hear the verdict. Elina sat upright, her gaze unwavering and full of determination, no longer filled with confusion or fear like the first time she entered the courtroom. Mara sat beside her, always ready to offer support whenever needed. The two had thoroughly prepared for this pivotal moment. The evidence that Elina and Mara had gathered was presented in detail before the court. Once again, Elina affirmed that she was not the perpetrator of the gold key theft, but merely a victim of a sophisticated conspiracy. She began presenting irrefutable evidence, copies of ancient notebooks from the tomb, traces from the confrontation at the cemetery, and most importantly, the markings of the silver ring worn by one of the criminals when they attacked her. She pointed out that the silver ring was a significant identifying feature of one of the noble families in town, a family she never imagined would be involved in the theft. But as everything slowly came to light, Elina realized that it was someone from this noble family with the scheme to seize the gold treasure who had planned to frame her. Not only did he conceal his own crimes, but he also orchestrated an accident to kill Elina's parents, thereby eliminating witnesses who could ruin his plan. The courtroom fell silent. No one could believe what they had just heard. Elina continued to present the details that only she and Mara knew, clearly exposing the elaborate criminal plans of these individuals. The criminals, including someone from the noble family, could no longer escape. The situation reached its climax when the judge, after hearing the evidence and testimonies, had no choice but to declare Elina's innocence. The 13-year-old orphan, with her extraordinary intelligence and courage, had not only cleared her name, but also helped bring the wrongdoers to light. When the verdict was announced, Elina felt as though a tremendous weight had been lifted from her young shoulders. She had won not only this case, but also a battle with fate. Everyone in the courtroom stood and applauded, praising her bravery and wisdom. Despite her young age, Elina had become a symbol of justice and hope. But that wasn't all. Not only was Elina declared innocent, but she was also granted her rightful share, part of the town's gold treasure, along with assets seized from the noble family, which would be used to improve the living conditions for orphans and the poor in the town. She had changed her life, but also the lives of many others, lifting them out of poverty and injustice. With Mara's help and her own courage, Elina had proven that, despite her tender age, if one believes in the truth and justice, everything can change. She was no longer the orphan who had been looked down upon, but a hero in the hearts of the people of Claymore. The story concluded with a hopeful twist. Elina had not only restored her innocence and justice, but had also changed the way others saw her. She proved that, in the darkest circumstances, the light of truth and courage could still guide those who dared to stand up for what is right.
Miss Ellie sat in the antique armchair, her hands gently stroking the ivory shawl, her gaze distant, as though reflecting on the story she had just told. Her voice was warm and contemplative. Ah, my dear friends, Elina's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the truth is never easily found, and justice doesn't always come naturally. That young orphan, though so young, has taught us a great lesson in perseverance and the strength of truth. In a world where we often face lies and injustice, Elina refused to accept her fate. She kept fighting, kept seeking the truth, even though the path was full of difficulties and challenges. She showed us that no matter who we are, we all have the right to speak out and fight for what is right, no matter our age or circumstances. And more importantly, she reminds us that sometimes justice is not something that is easily handed to you. You must stand up and find it for yourself, even if it means paying the price with sweat, tears, and moments that seem utterly hopeless. So, when life challenges us, never let yourself sink into fear or silence. Remember, Just like Elina, we can always change our destiny as long as we keep believing in ourselves and in the power of truth. And sometimes, just one act of courage can light up the whole world. She paused gently, offering a kind smile. We can't change the past, but we can choose our future, can't we?